This is episode 1111.
And I think having an HR team that understands the financial side and how you're thinking about things is absolutely critical. In the same way, I think having a finance team that understands the human side of things is also critical. And I don't say that in I'm a sort of soft, bleeding heart, humans are humans and we should treat them differently. I'm talking about this because as a sort of investor in your own company, understanding where all the humans are they aligned? What's their performance? Are they getting stuff done? Are they getting the right stuff done? Is therefore driving the company forward. If it's only humans that can do that stuff, you better be sure as a CFO that your humans, recognizing they are humans, they need feeding and caring and all these other elements, but understanding how you as finance and you and your colleagues on the people team can turn those two components into performance from a company-wide perspective, getting the goals set, getting the performance measured, frankly, being disciplined on when there is low performance.
Today we speak with James Redfern, CFO of Reltio, who joined the company 8 months ago, stepping boldly into a new domain. After building his career in application software firms like Workday and PayScale, Redfern embraced the challenge of deep IT infrastructure, drawn not by title, but by the learning curve. He tells us how a trusted mentor, not a recruiter, helped him discover the opportunity and why those personal connections have shaped his career throughout. This is the kind of journey I committed myself to, Redfern tells us. Our talk with CFO James Redfern begins after this.
When it comes to company spend, most finance teams are on defense, reacting to surprise spend, chasing receipts, saying no. But there's a better way. Meet Brex, the AI-powered spend platform that boosts a company's control, earnings, and speed. 99% of customer spend is compliant. 11 million hours saved on expenses and accounting through automation. $681 million plus back to customers in business building rewards. Make every dollar count with Brex.
James Redfern is with us. He's Reltio's CFO since August 2024. He brings over 20 years of finance and strategy leadership from roles at PayScale, Workday, Morgan Stanley, and Accenture. James, welcome.
Thank you, Jack. Looking forward to it.
I didn't ask. Do you like James or Jim? Which one do you prefer?
I'm actually a James. I'm from the UK, where it's fairly rare to go to Jim.
That's
I don't
right.
care about Jim, but I tend to be James.
I had to ask. My brother's a James who goes by Jim, but us Americans. Anyway, we'd love to ask you to look back. You had these marquee names in your resume, some really interesting chapters that you've had, and I'll emphasize, you invested career years with each of the companies I just mentioned, meaning, no shorter than 5 years. It seems like you were with these companies, some a decade at Morgan Stanley, I think. Anyway, so James, please take a look back for us and identify some of those experiences you think best prepared you for this CFO role.
Sure. And I will say from the start, it wasn't like I, sat there as a 21, 22-year-old coming out of college going, my ambition is to be a CFO. It has kind of come through a series of those experiences you mentioned. And I do think the CFO role, at least from my perspective, ties them together very nicely and gets me to use this variety of experiences. And as you said, I've spent at least 5 years at 3 or 4 marquee named companies at this point. So it has been quite an exciting journey. I think of it in a number of different ways that adds up to the CFO role that I occupy right now. Even starting with the Accenture stuff, it seems a long way away now, but that was right out of college. That was the strategic consulting, think of it as the McKinsey type stuff. It was in the late 90s when the bubble was in its full swing. And what was then Anderson Consulting was helping large companies get their head around the internet. And that was, business models, monetization, the whole thing. And I was doing that a lot across different parts of Europe where it was a little bit of catch up to the US. And so it was a fun time. From my perspective, great grounding in business strategy, which obviously I use as a CFO. I did feel a little exposed in terms of the one area I didn't fully understand, needed to learn more, was on the finance side. And that's where I went off to business school, came to the US for business school. And within that, that, sort of fell in love with the finance side, really enjoyed the finance side. Again, on the strategic side of it, I wasn't necessarily, I'm not the best, don't pretend to be the best deep in the accounting side of the world. I certainly understand it and appreciate it. I actually come from a family of a brother, a father, and a grandfather who were accountants, so it's certainly somewhere in my DNA. But I was the wild child who went from, instead of going into accounting, went into investment banking, which, for me was a fantastic experience from a CFO perspective. Obviously, it's hugely transactional. So, main areas where I spent my time, one was on IPOs and one was on M&A. And obviously, at that age, you're operating at a level of intensity and a level of seniority that for someone in their, late 20s, early 30s is pretty remarkable. I got to work with large companies, very senior leadership teams in, what for many are career-defining transactions, whether that is IPO or M&A. So that was a lot of, a CFO in my mind has one of those key pillars is being able to do transactions, and being able to manage that internally as well as the transaction itself. And then I transitioned from the banking over to what was one of my IPO clients, which was Workday. And that's where I feel like I added the operational side. So if you can see the theme, at least in my mind, is I started on the strategic side. I went through the transactional side. And then as I got to Workday, I was on the transactional side. So I was on M&A, but I was also doing investor relations, and then ended up doing M&A integration. And that's where I really got that feel for the operational side, the day-to-day, what are this, in our case, when we did an integration of a large company at Workday, it was probably a virtual 100+ person team. You'd have consultants in, you'd have the business leaders of all the different functions. So you start putting all these pieces together, and at a certain point, I was like, gosh, I'd love to be at the most senior level, helping make the big decisions for a company where I can help understand all those different components, put them together and be a CFO. And so it was at PayScale, the company I was at before this one, where I got my first shot at the CFO role. And thankfully, I kind of survived the first 6 to 9 months, and then COVID hit. So I then had to kind of earn my spurs being a CFO through the interesting times of COVID. But again, managed to apply both the operational, the strategic. We did M&A, so we did the transactional, and then ultimately ended up having a good opportunity at Reltio, which I'd done about 8 months ago. So it's been quite an interesting journey across those different sort of dimensions. And as you can imagine, I'm a specific type of CFO, and there are a wide variety and can work in lots of different circumstances. But that gives you a sense.
That's wonderful overview for us. I just want to see if we can highlight your really early chapter, because I'm trying to peg it. And you said you rebelled. You ended up going down the finance path eventually, but it seems like you were your academics. I know you have multiple master's degrees. It seems like you were coming from this family accountant and you wanted to do anything other than accounting. You're studying philosophy, politics. And as you described, you land in consulting at Accenture in the London office there, I suppose. But it seems like you're looking for another path, but you're still landed in industry. How am I doing? Am I again the academic degrees? It seems like you're adventurous. You're trying to blaze a path if you can understand yourself well enough to know what's going to satisfy me.
Yeah, I would say in some ways and it goes back to my comment, which is I didn't and I don't necessarily have this here's where I want to end my career or whatever it might be. Yeah. At every point, it's been a little bit of an opportunity has arisen or something has come where I feel like there's going to be a steep learning curve, and I'm interested in that learning curve. And whatever it is I'm doing today, I feel like I'm good at it, or I'm enjoying it, but I may not feel like I'm being challenged, and I'm not necessarily acquiring a new set of stripes. I don't know if this will sound ridiculous, but I remember when I was a kid, as a 10-year-old, we had the Cub Scouts in the UK where you used to earn your badges, and there was always a competition among the 10-year-old boys. It's like who had badges down to the bottom of their sleeves. And at a certain point, this sounds immature, but from a career perspective, I felt like I was earning a series of badges, and that's not something that takes a couple of weeks or a couple of months. That's a multi-year process. But at a certain point, you get to that level of expertise, and you kind of go, okay, the next phase would be sort of doing the same thing again, maybe quicker, maybe faster, maybe quicker, maybe better, but marginally. Whereas, I remember, I'll give you the example of the Morgan Stanley one, where Workday had knocked on my door and asked me to come and help with M&A. I was having a great banking career. There was no particular reason to leave. And at a certain, I'd just helped out on the IPO for Alibaba, which was the biggest IPO in history at that time. And I realized it was amazing, but it actually wasn't quite that thrilling because I knew exactly what I was doing and it was kind of easy. And that sounds ridiculous, but I was like, okay, if this is the sort of how an IPO goes, I've done a lot of these now. Now, wouldn't it be exciting if at some point I could be on the other side of that and be a CFO of a company that went public, as an example? So that's one of those that's in my brain as something to head towards, but it's sort of, I wasn't satisfied with just whatever I was doing. It was like, how can I learn something new and challenge myself? So at each of those phases where I've transitioned from one company to another, it's been something new and different that comes into the equation that I want to learn and get better at. And that explains each of those different changes, which ultimately leads up to sort of where I am today, but not necessarily with that as the end point in mind, more of a organic doing what I think is interesting and challenging at the next phase that I can sort of have a reasonable chance of success because it's not completely new, but there are elements of it which I can bring from my old world and bring, new stuff into the equation.
When you join Workday, you join their corporate development area. You were there nearly 5 years. Just want to know, while you were there, I understood that you had helped develop their M&A integration function. Do I have that right first?
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right.
What does that mean exactly? So they had been integrating some of their acquisitions in the past, but they didn't have a process yet? Or what does that mean exactly?
Yeah, and maybe I should specify larger scale M&A integration. So the company before I joined had done 2 or 3 very small, what I would call engineering-centric acquisitions, where it's, I don't want to underplay this, but ultimately you're not really worrying too much about the customers. You're buying the technology and the people. And so in that case, it's a relatively straightforward tuck in of those people into an engineering organization. Don't get me wrong, there's real skill involved in terms of the existing technology leadership, R&D leadership, having those folks come in, be excited, still think they're working on something important, not feel like they've lost their child because of the sort of startup they were used to has moved into something bigger. But that is less of a requirement on a what I would call a full integration team. The best example, so the last deal of size I did at Workday was a company called Adaptive Insights, which a lot of your listeners will know is one of the planning solutions for financial organizations. And so when we acquired that company, this was a whole different scale to what Workday had done before. It was around 500 employees at that point, integrating into a company which, when I was at Workday at that point, probably had around 9,000 employees. So this is one where you are taking a whole company. This is not a 20-person, 30-person engineering team. This is a real company with real functions. It was about to go public. It was a fully fledged company. And so when you think about the integration side of things, what you're ultimately looking to do is have a typical integration playbook, which most companies, once you get to a certain scale, should have sort of on the shelf ready to go, it's called a 10 or 12 work stream plan. We're including all the organizational structures around the integration. So an organizing committee, an oversight committee, whatever the areas might be, and then each of the functions that is going to be integrated into a company needs to have a program management and a planning process to go from day of announcement, or, and you've got the diligence and all the execution stuff before you announce a deal, but the integration, which needs to certainly be involved before this, but at the time of you make an announcement, you've suddenly got 500 employees who are going, oh, yesterday I worked for Adaptive Insights. Today I work for Workday. What's changing? Like, what does my payroll change? Does my vacation change? Like, there's the human day-to-day stuff. Then there's all the back office stuff that what are we doing on the financials? What are we doing? Take every single function at a company, and you can leave no piece it can be left behind. You've got to figure out what you're doing with all of them. And some of them, there's a philosophy around decisions up front that the senior leaders need to make around, are we doing full integration immediately? Are we doing pretend it's left alone for 6 months and then we'll start to pull pieces in? There's some big philosophical decisions to be made. But once those philosophical decisions have been made, there is a full program managed, fully kind of thought through day-to-day project management. I would call it about a 12-month process to get from, over here with a completely separate company to over here with a fully integrated set of humans, people, processes, systems, you name it. So that to me was, my contribution was to help articulate some of that before we did the deal. So, we had, and it's not just, typically with these things at larger companies, it's not just internal. You also want and need external support from consultants, because those consultants can come in, add horsepower at very short notice for a relatively short period of time to get everything set up to help manage these things. And then over time, you dial them back. But they also come with a ton of experience. So you end up designing this sort of org design with consultants included, then you start to row them back. But having that ready to go so you don't end up, hey, we've just bought this company, turning around and being like, what are we going to do with it? And look, I was in charge of the integration side of things, but I will say the former CEO of Adaptive Insights is someone who, he stuck around and he was absolutely instrumental in making that successful. I was there sort of helping support that. But having a process that we could work together and work through was very important.
Wow. Nice insight there for us, for sure. Is there any one lesson that you left behind? Meaning, if we do another one of this size or magnitude, here's the roadmap that we used. I would leave this part out. Is there something that
there's a different deal. I still want to PayScale. I'll give it. This sounds ridiculous, but it's such a small thing. And maybe this is because I had 5 years at Workday, but I'm absolutely, despite being a finance leader, I'm absolutely committed to how important the HR side of these things is, or the people side of these things. I'll give you the example of another deal we did where it was actually at PayScale, where we were on the West Coast and we bought an East Coast company. Long story short, there was some miscommunication. It just didn't get rolled out brilliantly. But long story short, and it sounds like you're on the East Coast, the company we bought had a very long-standing commitment to summer Fridays, where Friday lunchtime between Memorial Day and Labor Day, that was sort of, people could leave the office early, get down to, wherever it is, the Hamptons or Cape Cod, I don't know, wherever it might be. And it was one of those where we on the West Coast had an unlimited PTO policy. So in theory, nothing would change. People could still do that, but there was a decision to sort of essentially close it down very quickly. And we did the deal in February or March. And so I would say that it's not that specific thing that I'm talking about getting right. It's recognizing the people side is so critically important, and understanding it's the day-to-day when the deal is announced. What does a individual who knows nothing about the corporate strategy, knows nothing about all the sort of fancy things the boards talk about that ultimately kind of drive to these things and make them the right answer, what is it actually going to change for them day-to-day, and putting that first. And I will give you the example of how I then helped make sure we did that, which was at PayScale, when we did an acquisition, we made sure that lead of the acquisition integration piece, so the stuff I had done when I was at Workday from a corporate development perspective, we actually had that lead be from HR. And we had a strong candidate who was in that HR function, but it was like, we need HR and people-centric views on this. That is most important to us. We took an HR consultant as the prime supporter of that integration. We could have taken a technology consultant. We chose the HR side of things. So it's, from my perspective, it's just putting people first in that M&A transaction, which is obviously so finance-driven and data-driven and spreadsheet-driven. It's like, if you don't get the people stuff right, and you're buying the people at the end of the day, if you're in the software industry, at least where I am, as we say, that our company walks out the door every night. And if you can't get them coming back every day, the next day, you've done something wrong. So people side, I would encourage everyone to really partner closely with the people side and make sure the people stuff is taken care of.
So you just shared an example from your years at PayScale. I should mention that you stepped into a CFO role when you left Workday at PayScale. You were CFO there during that acquisition. What is it that, you finally decided, okay, it's time. And I have to believe there were other opportunities that came along, and you weren't interested. You were interested in PayScale. They were looking to grow through acquisition, it occurs to me, and obviously your resume spoke to that. But what else about PayScale attracted you? For those people who are, future finance leaders who right at the cusp, what was it that made you say, yes, this is the opportunity I want to?
Yeah, there was clearly, take it from my perspective at that point, I'd done corporate development, investor relations. I could continue doing that at Workday. I could go to another company. It was part of the I just wanted to get another challenge. And for me, CFO was the next challenge. At that point, Workday was a $40 billion plus public company. So I wasn't likely to be the first time CFO of a company that size. So I was interested in finding an opportunity. The things that are partly what appealed to me with the move from Workday to PayScale was the fact that I did bring, and we talked about this earlier, I did bring some things to the table that I knew I would be strong at. So one was the M&A you mentioned, which obviously I could sort of not do in my sleep, but I had a lot of experience with. And then, the other piece was PayScale was within the same industry. So it's still it was selling to HR people. It is a subcomponent, obviously a much smaller company than Workday, but it was in the same, it's an application zone. It's a SaaS company. It has 3-year subscriptions, the same as Workday. Like there were a lot of similarities. So it was I would say it's that version of, it was stretching me but allowing me to bring some strengths into the equation. And so it just ended up being a great fit. The funny thing I always tell people is I first heard about this through someone, and everything sounded great. I'm like, wow, it's the similarities. It's a chance for me to be a CFO, all these wonderful things. Yeah. And then they mentioned it was in Seattle and not in San Francisco. And I'm like, what? I can't. And anyway, I ended up commuting to Seattle. I mean, that's another thing I would just say. These opportunities to get first-time CFO roles are not easy. Right. By definition, first-time CFO those are 2 or 3 words, depending on how you define it, that people don't really want to hear. CFOs want lots of experience, gray hair, and all those things. For me, at least, that was an example. I had young kids, and I committed to, at least for the first 6 months, doing 4 days a week, commuting up to Seattle from San Francisco, because I knew in order to be successful, I was going to have to commit a lot of time to that particularly the first 6 months where you're really trying to get your sort of feet on the floor. But also it was going to enable the team to be successful if I was in person there. Now the world has changed a little bit. This was pre-COVID. And so, thankfully I'd got through that period before COVID hit. But, I do think there's an element of, you can't be too picky, but you find the things where you can bring strengths, and you've obviously got some learning areas, and you try and blend the two. So there's a couple of things I would think about.
Great insight there for us. Thank you for that. We want to find out about Reltio, and want to just ask, are you using, I always like to ask if you're using recruiters along the way, or is it just your network really that came into play here?
Good question. I have certainly talked to recruiters, but I would say the last 2 jobs have both come through personal network. And that's through board members, people I've worked with before, connections. It clearly just de-risks everything for everyone, and myself included, where, this current company I'm at, it actually came through, I was having a conversation with what I consider to be a somewhat of a mentor in the industry. And I was saying, look, I was actually looking at something else. And he said, oh, if you're looking, and I was like, well, I'm not really looking, but he said, if you're looking, I am aware of another company that I'm on the board of that has an interesting opportunity. The CFO is going to retire. Like, I think you'd be a great fit, all those kinds of things. So it did come from personal network, but I certainly talked to recruiters as well. And it just, I do think it's not completely coincidence, but the times I have made moves, there's been a personal connection where just, in some ways, I think it's almost psychic safety, where you're just like, oh, someone I know, who I trust, who likes me, who understands what I can bring to the table, is sort of making a connection here, and that gives me some confidence, as well as obviously the other side as well. So it's you definitely got to keep the personal network working as well. I won't pretend I'm one of these excellent networkers who spends all my time sort of keeping up with lots of people. In my experience, is sort of people you actually have worked with and really have spent time with, not someone you slightly know who happens to know something else. So that's just my personal experience.
Yeah. So I should mention again a 5-year investment at PayScale. No, it was a beefy chapter for you, let's say, and you joined Reltio in 2024. Tell us about this company. What's it about today?
Yeah, awesome. So Reltio is a fantastic company. My switch here was, I was already a CFO, so that wasn't what I was going to bring to the table. But the switch for me, this is a completely different part of the software industry. So those last two companies, PayScale and Workday, both in the application side, selling to HR people, kind of, you can sort of physically see and do what they do. This is what I would call a deep IT infrastructure company, where Reltio's ultimate kind of objective is to enable people to have clean and reliable data across all these different systems that they have within their enterprise stack. We're selling to the world's largest companies, like big names. You'd recognize all of them. We've only got about 190-ish customers, and we got about $160 million of annual recurring revenue. And so these are large deals for very large companies. And effectively, the easiest way to describe it is, if you think about Workday is an example of what is called the system of record for HR, and then you've got Salesforce is the system of record for customers. What is true, and it would be great if one of these companies, SAP or Oracle or Salesforce or Microsoft, sort of owns the entire universe of your data. But in 99% of companies, there are way more than one company owning all this data. And so ultimately what companies need to be able to do is take data from all these different systems, confirm that, this customer in the customer database is the same as this customer in the marketing database, is the same as this customer in the services database. Our technology enables people to do that all in the cloud, all at scale, at speeds that don't make any sense, and just kind of do it real time. And we've got some incredible customer examples of people being able to do that. And so we are, in our minds, the next generation of that type of solution. We are replacing companies like IBM, Informatica, Tibco that did the prior generation. As you probably saw recently, Salesforce just bought Informatica, partly for this functionality we are talking about, and they recognize the importance of it. And as they are rolling out their data cloud, they are clearly sort of seeing the same challenges we are seeing, where they bought what we consider to be the legacy player in that industry, and we obviously think we can outcompete them. But it is a recognition of this importance of having, as you build out your AI capabilities, and we're all figuring out what the next revolution looks like in terms of AI. We're highly confident that, as with the prior generations, having data that is not, clean and accurate and, condensed to the point where it's one customer equals one customer, not three different customers in three different systems, that the importance of what we do will only increase with AI. And so, we're feeling pretty good about our ability to help support that next generation of technology stacks. So I don't know if feel free to ask any questions. I don't pretend.
I like the fact that it is a new path for you. It's a new space for you. So
and it's a little uncomfortable because I will say, in the prior generations, I knew those industries very well strategically. Yeah. So I could be like, I knew what every company in and around, certainly the HR space, and frankly in a lot of the application space, I kind of knew what was going on. Here I'm like, I'm 8 months in, and I'm like, look, I've made some progress, but I'm definitely not where I need to get further along, and that's just part of the journey I committed myself to.
Some of the numbers I've seen, Reltio had grown something like 145 million in ARR with a CAGR of 47%. These might be a little dated, but can you tell us about how are you going to sustain that type of growth trajectory?
Yeah. I mean, look, for us, though that number's a little bit outdated. I said we're north of about 160 million of ARR at this point. Okay. I mentioned it. We have 180 customers. That's it. And at least the top 3,000 companies in the world will need some sort of solution to this challenge. So for us, the first port of call is obviously new customers. Where, as an example, right now we're getting a lot of traction in Europe. We're continuing to see lots of traction in the US. We have very little in Europe, very little outside the US currently. So that clearly kind of gives us one avenue. With our existing customers, we have what we tend to do is we land them at, call it $400,000 or $500,000. Our average customer now is closer to $800,000-$900,000, where we will sell them. Using the examples I gave you, you might have the customer kind of clean data as one domain, we call it. We might then also have a product side of the equation where we will go sell another different product to the same customer. Similarly, we might have different business units within a customer that might also want more equations. So there's new customers, there's existing customers. And then look, ultimately we've got the AI we're playing out right now. We're just launching a new version, or not a new version, but the ability for customers to either build their own agents on top of our kind of platform, or we're going to actually, within a few months, we will be rolling out new agents where, if you think about what we do, there are plenty of companies who have humans using our software, taking some of the harder matches. So you've got this information about customer in 3 different databases. All our software will sort of clean out 90x% of them, but there will still be some that are more difficult, and you can put a human in front of that and say, okay, day to day, kind of clean this up, make a match. We think we can agentically sort of solve a lot of that. And so there are companies who employ 20, 30 people. We want them to be able to employ those people to be able to do even more matching. And so we think there's a real business case for what we're doing. And, we're excited about what the AI side can bring.
Since your arrival and this new rollout, these rollouts that you have since been part of, can you tell us, have you structured finance in any way to better accommodate some of what AI is allowing this company to pursue?
Yeah, so I was very lucky. I inherited an incredibly good team, and it was structured in a way that I agree with and support. And I should give you my sort of basic philosophy, which is I think about finance in 3 major buckets. So there's the accounting and the kind of core systems side of things that obviously gets audited and needs to be 100% buttoned up. And we my mantra there is always be public ready. You don't have to be public ready, but that means you are rigorous. Everything is clean. You don't have the material weaknesses, significant deficiencies, all the things, and that house is very much in order. Then the next piece is the budgeting, so the financial planning and analysis side of things. I have a small team, but very, very strong here, and I've kept that in place, and that continues to operate, I think, at a good level. And then the last piece is what I call, and I bucket a number of things together, but I call that strategic finance piece, where I'm thinking of corp dev, IR, long-term business planning, and just kind of having a long-term view of the financial models that I put into that third bucket. So from my perspective, buckets 1 and buckets 2, I inherited in very good shape. There have been minor tweaks, but nothing significant. Obviously I did my assessment in the first 90 days of do I have the people and systems and the processes? They're in pretty good shape. So I would say from the AI perspective, I've attended a number of CFO forums in the last few months, and we're all, I would say, starting to dabble on the AI side. We are not at a point where I'm looking at a massive restructuring. And the initial view is adopting AI from some of the companies that we already work with. So in NetSuite, and in our case for Close, we use Flowcast. A number of these companies are bringing things in, and we are at the stage where we're definitely AI leaning forward. Our company is deeply embedded into the tech ecosystem, so AI is very important to us. As a company, we're all kind of moving in that direction. So for now, it's, I would say, simplifying and streamlining and automating kind of what we already have. It is not some radical reshifting. Obviously, over time, and look, I will be excited when I hear from other CFOs who've done a radical restructuring, a radical shift, and the world has changed dramatically. I suspect I don't want to be the first to try that, and that's maybe a CFO being a little bit risk averse. But the risk of finance trying something super aggressive and failing is probably not a risk return option that most boards I think are going to want you to take. So from my perspective, it's a little bit cautious. Do I think I could be more aggressive? Probably a little bit, but I'm also like, look, let's make sure, we keep the day-to-day lights on. And that's one of those challenges we as a company face, like everyone else, where you're sort of, the AI right now feels a little bit like there's the day job, and then we're throwing AI on top of everything else. So we're having to make sure we manage it appropriately. But I haven't had to make any material changes since I got here. If and when we start doing, we haven't done a ton of M&A, and so obviously I would like to start doing M&A. In which case I will need to beef up a little bit on that strategic finance side, but it's not been necessary to date.
Can I ask, just looking at the capital structure, PayScale, and we know the IPO market is showing signs of warmth, but not, for the time being, it looks like IPOs are not the path many companies are choosing to take. What is your mindset as far as capital structure? Again, PayScale grew through acquisition. It sounds like there are some acquisitions here that might happen, but growth and capital, what would you tell us?
Yeah, no, good question. And I mentioned my sort of portfolio in terms of preparation for CFO, I've also had a portfolio of board experiences or ownership experiences. So Workday was obviously a public company. PayScale was a controlled private equity owned company by a company called Francisco Partners. And then my current company is controlled by, it's venture backed. So the majority owners are multiple VCs from earlier rounds of funding. So I've now seen these different kind of flavors of how boards operate, how kind of, the finance function operates within those different contexts. From my perspective, for us, from a capital perspective, we are lucky. So we raised that money in 2021. We have not spent it. So we still have between $90 and $100 million of cash sitting on our balance sheet, and we are cash flow positive. So I do not sit here having to worry about raising money in order to get the company to break even, in order to get the company to the next phase of funding. I sleep pretty well at night given our bank balance. And then we have because we're a software company with multi-year contracts, I have over $250 million of future contracted revenue sitting there. So I do not have to sit there worrying about doing anything capital structure wise under duress or under pressure. It is very much sort of choices we will make. From my perspective, given our capital owners, they have been in a long time. I think they are not impatient at all. So they're very much, look, you guys continue to grow. We're growing. It's not in that 40 zone you're talking about. It's, between 15 and 20% at this point, but obviously at a much larger scale. And as we go through this continued growth, we obviously hope there'll be a reacceleration from some of the investments we're making on the AI side of things. And there is very much a supportive board in terms of maintaining growth and investing in that growth, with a view that, the tailwinds on our industry are very, very high. All of that said, obviously I recognize when I've got investors who've been in a long time, at a certain point, they are going to expect some sort of cash returned to them. And, that means I need to be ready for, without, trying to pull the triggers on, but ready for could be some sort of secondary option where we sell part of the company, enable them to get liquidity without taking the sort of the whole company into different hands. There's obviously the option of selling the entire company. That's one of those we will, I don't think, go out and proactively do that. But if someone comes along, obviously that's something we have to consider. And there's various little components within the capital table that we could adjust. Given current ownership, I don't anticipate, taking my cash pile down significantly, putting out dividends or levering up with debt and other things. Those are all things a different owner with a different approach might choose to do. So take my prior company. So I'll give you the example. My current company, I sit with $90 million plus of cash on the balance sheet, and we're generating cash. My prior company, we were lucky if we had our, our weekly cash above $10 million, because private equity firms do not let you sit with a bunch of money just sitting in your bank account, not earning any returns. So there's just a slight difference of emphasis in terms of, growth versus profitability, and depth of perspectives on where the right place to focus your time and energy is. So it's a little bit different. But right now, I'm in a spot where, I've got to be thinking all that stuff through, but I'm not under any time pressure. And so we'll just have to see how it play out.
Before we get to our finance strategic moment, I'm curious about your mindset when it comes to hiring FP&A people. Just all those years in corporate development. I'm wondering, where would James look for an FP&A leader? Would he go to a corporate development first? Or what is this professional and set of skills that he would identify? Where would he find those? Where would he look? What would you tell us?
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, FP&A is a very important strategic, for me, I think of FP&A as almost like a mini capital allocator of capital. I come with that mindset of, look, we have a budget next year of X $100 million, and let's look at all the different places we're looking at it. I'm very fanatical about laying out your budget in a way that at the highest level you understand it, and you sort of break it down from top down, all the way down to every individual, and you know what they're doing and where they're doing it. So from my perspective, the key attributes I look for, it's not necessarily they have to have come up through the FP&A path. They could come out of banking. They could come out of accounting. What I'm looking for is obviously highly analytical and deep into the understanding the absolute details and getting stuff right. It's at a different, the accounting side is stuff is right or wrong, and it had better all be right. Obviously, as you get into the FP&A side of things, you're looking at forecasting. So it's got to be right, but you've also got to be comfortable with ambiguity. And so what I'm looking, and then the third piece I look for, so I've got the detailed and the analytics. I've got the comfort with ambiguity and what I call the judgment that goes with forecasting, and being willing to sort of take risk and understand what all of these things then translate into. And then the third piece is, honestly, is the human side, which is in a lot of cases, you're working on the budgets with other senior leaders, the sales leader, head of RevOps, the R&D leader, all these other components. And I've seen this now multiple times where, and I have it here, I had it at PayScale, where in some ways the head of FP&A becomes, if not the most important finance person at the company internally, they should be pretty close. And they are typically very, very well respected because they're typically very smart. They understand what's going on. They're trying to help get budget to these partners they have. And so that's an intangible, but that's a really, really important one. So I basically look for that package. Obviously, at a point where I'm looking to hire a head of FP&A, they typically do have FP&A history. Like I have not, and others may have done this, I have not hired someone in from no FP&A history into that role. So there's clearly a sort of, how do you work your way up into that role if that's the pathway someone wants to go down. But in my mind, done well, it is in many ways the central figure from a finance perspective in terms of what the company sees. The accounting lead is obviously critical, but in some ways is a little less visible because it's a little bit more on the reporting side and the historical side. And then the budgeting leader is more on the forward-looking side. So I do think it's, listen, if you have that combination of skills, I think it's by far the most interesting part, or I certainly enjoy that component. But you do need to, at a certain point, learn the basics, get up to that leadership level.
Yeah, great perspective for us. Thank you for that. We are up to what we like to refer to as our finance strategic moment, where we ask finance leaders to share, just look back in time and cherry pick perhaps a moment of insight that they've experienced along the way. What comes to mind when we ask for one?
Yeah, for me, it's I think the piece that I find some of my peers don't necessarily view it in the same way I do, but mine is just developing the strength of the relationship with the leadership on the HR side. Because at most companies nowadays, maybe most is too strong, but a lot of companies nowadays, people is the central component of what is creating the value for your company. And I think having an HR team that understands the financial side and how you're thinking about things is absolutely critical. In the same way, I think having a finance team that understands the human side of things is also critical. And I don't say that I'm a sort of soft, bleeding heart, humans are humans and we should treat them differently. I'm talking about this because as a sort of investor in your own company, understanding where all the humans are they aligned? What's their performance? Are they getting stuff done? Are they getting the right stuff done? Is therefore driving the company forward. If it's only humans that can do that stuff, you better be sure as a CFO that your humans, recognizing they are humans, they need feeding and caring and all these other elements, but understanding how you as finance and you and your colleagues on the people team can turn those two components into performance from a company-wide perspective, getting the goals set, getting the performance measured, frankly, being disciplined on when there is low performance. I remember, Workday was a great example. This is where I learned this. It's got great HR and people methods and processes, but B, they recognize that allowing low performers to continue at a company is not just bad because they are low performers in that particular role. It is also bad because the morale of other people who see low performers, not getting moved on, even though they might have checked out or they just got beyond their capabilities. I think that's really important. So for me, really developing the relationship with HR and the people side of things, I think is one. It took me a while to really understand the answer's not in the spreadsheet and really focusing on the HR side. Again, not just because it's, people and yes, motivating them and making them excited to be at work and inspired, but also having that high performance so that the company ultimately gets results from high performing individuals.
I realize lightning might not have struck you, but I'm wondering if there was a specific moment when you realized this is the game changer. Was it when you realized you had made that connection with HR or the people side of it? And not to get too specific with us, but was there a conference room where, you can recall that specific moment or not really?
It's funny. the moment that stands in my mind is actually less a moment with a human or in a conference room. It's actually a handbook. But I remember when I was probably a year at Workday, and they were in the process of creating what I would call the manager handbook of how to manage people. Because a lot of the feedback at Workday, and I think it's true everywhere, is, a lot of people in junior roles, they're sort of, the mark of the next level is I have people reporting to me. And I'd obviously come out of banking where you weren't really, the reporting relationships are somewhat loosely defined. You don't have this, at one point I was in charge of the analysts, right? The 20 analysts or whatever it was, but they don't really report to you. They report off to lots of different people. And so I was in this new operational world, and there was this handbook that I think I saw an early draft because I was working with the HR team, and I think I needed to see it for an M&A deal or whatever it was. And and it had this whole thing where it laid out, okay, you need to meet weekly and set goals. You need to have quarterly goals. You need to have career discussion. And it was suddenly, for me, it was this laid out, you can, this isn't ad hoc. I think until you see something like this, you're like, managing is you sort of meet with people and stuff happens, stuff doesn't happen. I'm like, there's a sort of science to this. And it's not science. It's art, and it's showing you care, and it's helping people prioritize and doing what managers do. But to me, it was this moment of like, okay, I get all the spreadsheet stuff. I can do all the finance stuff. But this in my mind is kind of almost the key to, okay, multiply this little thing by, at that point, probably, I don't know, we probably had 5,000 employees at Workday. Yeah. And I was like, okay, I can now see how I can connect, this brilliant CEO's vision all the way through his direct reports and those of us who are at the senior levels down to my managers and then the folks below me. And I was like, I see how this all, and it was a little bit of an epiphany. That sounds crazy, but it was maybe for those who've always worked in the operational roles, that sounds ridiculously naive. But for me, it was like, there's my playbook on the human side. And then I think it's blending that, there's operating it individually, but then multiplying that by spreadsheets and the finance side of things. So you're like, okay, put that together. And like, that's what especially in a software world, that's all a business is. It's a bunch of people sitting in my spreadsheets on the finance side, and it's a bunch of people being managed and aligned and goal set, goal driven, and all these other things. That's kind of it. And so I guess that's my version of an epiphany.
Yeah, that's great. No, that's great. It makes a lot of sense too. Your perspective coming out of Wall Street and how that was so loosely defined. It wasn't really managing like an operator. Yeah,
correct. It's a very different environment. I still have my moments where I tell people, listen, I'm only X years. I've been working for, I think you mentioned 20 plus years. But as a manager in an operational role, it's actually only, it's probably getting on 10 now, but it's a shorter period. So I've definitely had to, and I continue to try and learn and improve that. It's certainly not something where I've, grown up across that.
Well, quickly, we want to ask you just to look back once more for us. When you first stepped into the CFO role, that first 60 days, what is the piece of advice you would go back in time and give yourself? And again, this is something you didn't know. That first 60 days, you looked around and you're like, oh, that's part of this, is it? Something you didn't know that you could go back in time and tell yourself.
Look, from my perspective, I was coming in, having not been a CFO, having worked in an operational company, worked in banking. And I think from my perspective, it was having the confidence that if you've been chosen for the role, they've seen enough to believe you will get there, but being curious enough and humble enough to say, I don't know what I'm doing. And I need you. I'll give you the example. Like I had the controller at PayScale when I first joined. Yeah. Really, really, a very, very nice and good person, be very good at what she was doing. And I didn't try and come in there and say, I know what I'm doing. I was like, listen, I want to work with you. And she was one of these sort of, what's the right word? She didn't pull her punches. So she wasn't like, humble, not humble. She wasn't trying to put me in my place or anything, but she was just like, yeah, you don't know what you're doing and I'm going to help you. And we're going to figure this out together. And so I think it's that mix of having the confidence that you can do the job and you can, become a great CFO, but if also the humility to recognize you are vulnerable and you're vulnerable for a period of time. Now, like in my case, I would say I was vulnerable for at least 6 to 9 months where if multiple people, if I had been what I would call the classic banker trying to run in and pretend they know everything, I think I would have fallen flat on my face, and I think people would have just walked away from me. And so it's a tough mix. Frankly, it's the similar concept actually to when I went into banking, where, not to get into all the details, but I came out of business school where there's a layer below you who's come out of undergrad. And you're essentially you tend to be paired as a new person out of business school with an undergrad who's been doing it for a year. So you don't have two newbies.
Oh, yeah.
And so you have this same dynamic where they can basically do it on their own. They don't need you. They're kind of like, and so you have to create this sort of almost agreement of who does what, how do you make their lives easier? The example I always give was, I would stay till 3 a.m, whatever it was in banking, with the analyst, the junior person, even if I didn't really need to be there, to help flip the books at the end of the night or whatever it was. But it was part of my sort of, we're in this together and I am part of this team. And I recognize I am not, I am somewhat dependent on you, but I'm going to help you as best I can. And over time, I will obviously learn my side of things and I will make sure I can contribute as well. But just those kinds of things where just like you're both being a leader, but also being part of the team and kind of showing you're willing to make the same level of sacrifice and commitment and not just sort of swan off and be like, hey, it's 5 p.m. I'm done. I'll see you in the morning.
Great insight there for us. Thank you. And we always like to ask our guests to reflect a little on the personal side before we go. We're wondering if there's something, you've been there a year, must be still quite a few things your colleagues don't know about you. What comes to mind about something most people don't know about James Redfern?
I don't know. I don't know how many of my colleagues know how, on my weekends, if I'm not with the kids, I'm busy trying to play as much tennis as I can. I have this personal objective about getting to this next level in tennis, and it's taking an awful lot longer, but that is where I sort of relieve my stress and spend my time on the weekend. So that's a personal passion of mine, which last 3 or 4 years has been pretty high on my.
Did you play in the UK growing up? Or
so I played a little bit in high school, and then I had a 25-year break where I essentially couldn't do anything. Yeah. And then about 4 or 5 years ago, I'm like, I just want to try that again. And now I'm a little bit hooked. So that's what keeps me entertained. But I've got youngish kids, so I got there's plenty of time running them around and making sure we spend time together as well.
Well, we are up to our last question. We want to ask you to look forward finally, and we're curious about your priorities for the coming 12 months. What would those be?
Yeah, look, my priorities are, we've just had a board meeting and we are, like everyone else, working out how our investments in AI and the implications of AI and what they do for Reltio. And so from my perspective, it's making sure we in the finance team provide all the necessary data, visibility, reporting, accounting, all those things. As we're in a transitional model where we have both the legacy side of our business, and legacy may be too strong a word, but what we've done historically, plus we're adding a whole new set of investments, a whole set of monetizations. And that obviously, as you have adjustments, there's the risk of overwhelming everyone. There's a risk of things falling on the floor. There's a whole series of risks that go with that. And obviously as CFO, and part of my job is to try and minimize risk without constraining risk-taking and experimentation. And we're in this whole new environment. So for me, it's striking the right balance over the next 12 months between, as this world transitions, making sure we maintain a level of visibility and control and data and reporting and enablement of decision-making, not slowing things down materially, but also not letting things get, out of control where, as an example, I, like everyone else, having data that shouldn't be out in the broader LLM model universe getting out because we don't have controls properly in place for, engineers or whatever it might be. Those kinds of things also have to be put in place, as well as all the excitement around AI. So I think it's just, I would call it striking the right balance through a period of transition.
James Redfern, thank you for joining us on CFO Thought Leader.
All right.